Bank governor was actually warning of the potential losses nearing 100,000. As you may have heard from the Department of Trade and Industry, South Africa is waiting to hear from the US about a trade proposal that it submitted last month in the hope of avoiding high tariffs. Only 2 days are left before that 30% levy on our exports kicks in. The government has been mum about its negotiations with the US President Donald Trump's administration ahead of this deadline on the 1st of August, which comes as the two countries' relationship has deteriorated over South Africa's domestic race policy, but also the genocide case against Israel. You'll remember Trump imposed these new tariffs around the world before delaying most of them to allow for negotiations. In the past week, the US government struck deals with the EU and Japan to lower the tariffs on most goods to about 15% after threatening 25% or 30%. So we are still waiting to hear if the US will agree to the deal that we've made. And part of that deal is to offer the US 60 billion rand in private investment. But the question is that good enough? Is that enough to get the US to reconsider the 30% tariff or even extend it? Chifipa Mhango is the chief economist joining us now on the line. Is an independent economist. Chifipa, thank you so much for making time. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Clement, and good morning to your listeners.
Yeah, let's maybe start with this proposal that our government has made to the US. Part of it is that there will be a 60 billion rand in private investment. There are other elements to this deal as well. But when you look at that, is that a sweet enough deal for the US to reconsider this 30% tariff?
Well, it's a question of what is it in for the U.S. in terms of how they foresee the economic year projection based on the interest that is driving them to do these issues here. I think what we must not undermine that there's some political undercurrents here on the foreign policy issue, but also, as you mentioned earlier on the domestic factors. Now the question is that did we address the issue that USA is trying to put as a motivation to improve in the element of tariffs to the South African economy? I think those are issues that we really need to unpack better and foresee what are the real give and takes that the USA is actually looking at. So much as we can offer the issue for investment, but the question we must look at is to see whether that is enough on the table from the point of view for what is the real motivation from the U.S. president in terms of the issue that is facing or has got concerns on the South African perspective.
Okay. So from an economic standpoint, how serious is this threat of a 30% U.S. tariff on South African exports? And could this tip us into deeper economic trouble? I mean, the citrus industry is already raising alarm bells that we could be looking at inevitable job losses here. The Reserve Bank governor was also warning of job losses. What impact are we likely to have on our economy as a result of these tariffs coming into play?
You must also remember one thing is that production in an economy is influenced by demand factors. And then demand factors can be both domestic as well as the international market. And I think the tariff situation, what is that going to do is that it's going to actually, in a way, impact the demand of the South African products into the U.S. economy. So in this case, when you look at the product line, obviously you're looking at the agriculture sector, such as the citrus fruits, macadamia nuts, and wine, for example. So if you look at that industry per se, in terms of job creation, it's actually taking almost close to 30,000 jobs in the South African economy. And that means that once the production base has actually been reduced because of the impact of low demand, corporates obviously get impacted on the margin side. So which means that once your margins are being reduced, obviously then you start now looking at issues of restructuring. And restructuring obviously leads to job losses. So we are looking at just in the citrus fruits, wine, and macadamia nuts industry, almost 30,000 jobs at risk here.
So we're looking at ripple effects that, could have impacts on supply chain, on employment, on household income. So if these 30% tariffs do come the 1st of August, how do they actually affect the prices of goods South Africans rely on? I mean, I know we speak about the citrus industry. We're talking about fresh produce there. But when we look at just particularly food in general, even cars, like just everyday essentials, because sometimes I think we make the mistake of thinking the people that will be impacted here in businesses, are like the citrus industry, for instance, or certain industries, automobile, etc. But I would imagine that at some point, these costs and the impact trickles down on ordinary South Africans through other ways.
Well, it does. I think, as I mentioned earlier on, that when it comes to issues of restructuring in the industry, obviously you look at your demand patterns. So when you restructure, you can restructure to say, okay, how do we best reduce cost? Or you can restructure on the point of view that the international demand market has actually now been taken away. So then you look at considering other markets where you can actually be exporting. But if that is not the case, then you then look at reducing production even domestically. And what that means that you start now looking at where can you then make wins. So then you start now increasing prices of your own goods in the domestic market to counter the impact of the reduced revenue coming from the international market. So it's a number of factors that how companies can do in terms of restructuring. But I think one of the key elements we must also not ignore here is that the overall impact of monetary policy in terms of the tariffs coming into effect. So, for instance, we're looking at a situation where currently our inflation rate is around 3%. It's moved slightly from 2.8% in the previous recording. What does that mean then in terms of tariffs? What it means that from the exchange rate point of view already, we're seeing an impact. Just on the 23rd of July, the rand dollar exchange rate was around 17 rand 58 cents. We're now moving at 17 rand 89 cents. So you're seeing the impact as the day gets closer. So I think the inflationary impact of the extended comes in very quickly because of the fact that imported prices, oil prices might end up now being affected in terms of how we import our fuel internationally, which means that realistically we might look at a movement upwards towards an inflation. That means that our low-income people domestically might be affected in terms of issues of affordability of goods and services, be it food and anything else.
So I would imagine that from a government's point of view, what they need to then plan ahead is the help for industries that are likely to be most affected. I mean, the citrus farmers, as I said, are warning of unsold fresh produce as this deadline looms. So is there a way you think government can somehow intervene should these tariffs come in on the 1st of August and at least assist, just such cushion the likely most affected industries?
Well, I think there's a number of options which government can consider in terms of supporting industries. One is the diversification of our export base into new markets. If you look at the citrus fruit industry, for instance, there's still opportunities in terms of growing new markets. In India, there's opportunities there, but also taking advantage of maybe the Intercontinental African Free Trade Area and also be an opportunity. Looking at the BRICS market in terms of expanding sales value, but also sales volumes in this new market, and also be an opportunity for the government to consider. But then we are also looking at increasing sales volume in existing markets. So let's say we are selling maybe that 10 tons for fruits into the Chinese market. We can then look at whether there can be opportunity to be moved to 60 tons. So all those are elements of negotiation that can be on the table. Yeah. But I think another area we'll be looking at improving our productivity aspects in the industries, skills development from the labor perspective, but also looking at the energy availability and also energy cost to minimize cost back that.
Yeah. Oh, Chifipa, the line is breaking there. It's breaking there, so I'm going to put you back to the producers to try and re-establish it, and then we'll continue our conversation after this at 17 minutes after 11.
Burning questions.
Insightful answers.
Listener's choice.
With Clement Manyathela.
21 minutes after 11 o'clock, we are talking about the looming tariff deadline and what it means for South Africans on our Listener's Choice feature this morning with Chifipa Mhango, who is an independent economist, director of economic research and strategy at Dawn Consultancy Group. Chifipa, you were talking earlier before the line started deteriorating there about the need for us to look at other markets through the Intercontinental Free Trade Agreement, the BRICS bloc. However, I must say that, how much of an option is looking at markets within the BRICS bloc when you've got Donald Trump also threatening countries that are aligning with BRICS and saying, if you continue to align with BRICS, then we're going to impose an additional 10% tariff. And I wonder if that has been a frustration on the part of our government representatives as they've been negotiating with the U.S.?
Well, I think that's one of the things that now we must now be prepared for in terms of scenario planning for our businesses. I think diversification becomes now a key factor, both from the value chain issues in terms of supply, but also from the market point of view in terms of where our decision of the market is. One of the things I've been observing about Trump is that not everything is about deal making. So he's taking the concept of his business operations in terms of how he's crafting elements of navigating policy issues. So I think as a country, we are now in the new terrain in the next 4 years in terms of how we move forward with regard to both our foreign policy, but also in terms of economic tools that we have in place in terms of driving our growth patterns in the economy. And I think trade has always been a tool which has been utilized for some of us who are advantaged in terms of age. We seem to be seeing a situation of the Cold War coming into effect in a new pattern where trade is actually now being used to navigate elements of foreign policy.
And Mantashe has actually suggested that we should seek new mineral markets if tariffs are imposed. And I wonder if that wouldn't elicit a response from the U.S. And to be clear, our mining commodities, including platinum group metals, those continue to have duty-free access to the U.S. Is that the case?
If that is the case, I mean, you're talking about 76% of our export basket is actually made up of minerals. So, but then you then enter into a thinking process to say, but why is the U.S. only trying to punish us on only these citrus fruits products? How come they're not punishing us in terms of minerals? So it tells you that it's more about the need basis point where they understand that their industries need minerals for their production base to actually move forward in terms of mineral beneficiation. So if a suggestion of deal making obviously can involve our minerals, I think that would be an option for us on the table to say tit for tat approach would be the way of dealing with things here in terms of the deal making process.
Yeah, and our government, from a statement they released yesterday, they said they're not going to go for a tit for tat. They don't want to retaliate. Here's a question from Simon who says, Clement, can you please ask your guest there, as a South African international freight forwarding agent, must I charge my clients more when exporting their cargo to the U.S. to accommodate these new tariffs? What options are available for those who are exporting their products, Chifipa?
Well, if our community from the competitive point of view is not actually feasible, then obviously that would be the option on the table. So, which means that because at the end of the day, these costs are always passed on to the consumer. So, in this case, we are talking about the American consumer actually suffering from the point of view of the products that come from South Africa. So, I think those are some of the options that which will actually even make our products even more uncompetitive on the international market, because the fact that the cost burden of tariffs it's actually it's always passed on to the consumer, and in this case being the export agents, obviously that cost will actually be passed on to them, and they must know how to recover that cost.
Yeah, another one says, hi Clement, please can your guest explain how tariffs work in both the importing and exporting countries? USA media explains that these increased tariffs will affect the American consumer and not the exporter. If this is true, then we don't need to worry about having a negative impact on us. Your comment on that, Chifipa? I mean, is it possible that you can, as Simon was suggesting, that maybe you just add in you add in something there then you transfer that cost to the consumer in the US? Then what are the consequences of that?
Well, I think, as I said, tariffs are a pricing mechanism in terms of demand patterns. So one needs to understand that the element why we put tariffs is to protect our domestic market. So it doesn't mean that for example, if we take an issue of citrus fruits, what it means that what Trump is trying to do is to force American consumers to buy more local products in the American economy. So by making South African products more expensive on the American economy. So in so doing, obviously it will have an impact. It will be based on the point of view of our local production base, our jobs, and so forth, and even our GDP patterns going forward. So I think the issue is it's more about the impact this tariff has on the domestic economy from the point of view of production. So we have to be worried. That is an element where we have to be worried of. We cannot have an impact in terms of what happens to American consumers, but their way of looking at things to choose more American products than South African products. That will be the impact we can have on international markets.
Yeah, because if we pass it on to the American consumer, then what if they stop buying our products because then they're just too expensive? So that doesn't help us. But just lastly, like from a global perspective, what are the consequences of such a trade war on the global economy, so to speak? Because I would imagine there are many countries that may decide to retaliate at some point if they don't reach a deal with the United States. Inflation probably then worsens across the world, and that has an impact on our economic growth. This is going to endanger global economic development. Already global markets tanked after Trump made the announcement. What do you foresee as the impact on the global economy?
I think on the global economy, we're already seeing currency instability. Even though, like for example, I gave an example on the South African perspective, but now you're seeing the exchange movements. So that will be where the global market will actually be watching in terms of currency movements. But also at the same time, you're looking at the reaction of other countries, and that will mean that inflationary pressures on the global economy will actually be much more seen. We have had an advantage in the recent months where most economies have actually been reducing interest rates or even keeping interest rates unchanged to push on the effect of what we call in terms of trying to address issues of inflation, but also trying to bring in element of motivation towards growth. But then this is actually tariffs are now going to create an instability in terms of monetary policy environment globally. So we don't want to see interest rates going up globally, because that then will also impact our local economy in terms of direction towards monetary policy.
Chifipa Mhango, thank you so much for making time for us. Chief Economist, Director of Economic Research and Strategy at Dawn Consultancy Group.
Hanging out with Clement
on 702.
Let's walk the talk.